Arizona Territory, 1865. The Great War between the states was grinding toward its brutal end, yet in this scorched stretch of frontier, another kind of war burned just as fiercely. One that spared no one, soldier or settler, man or woman, grown or child. The land showed no mercy. Saya Quinn stood on the wooden porch of her father's ranch house, watching the dying sun spill gold and blood across the distant mesas. At 22, Saya carried a quiet, unspoken strength forged by years under an unforgiving sky. Her father, Corwin Quinn, had built Whispering Pines Ranch with bare hands and stubborn resolve after her mother succumbed to fever when Saya was only 10. What began as dust and desperation had become one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory, over 300 head of cattle and the cleanest water for miles in every direction. Saya, her father called from inside storms rolling in. Bear Spring's gonna flood the wash. She turned and saw him framed in the doorway, his lined face tightened by worry lines that had deepened since Apache raids grew more frequent. "I'll handle it, Pa," she answered, lifting her skirts as she stepped into the yard. As she pulled the sun-bleached linens from the line, thunder growled low across the valley. The air felt thick, charged, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Wind teased loose strands of her honey-brown hair from its practical braid while she worked fast. By the time she finished, heavy raindrops struck the hard earth, kicking up pale bursts of dust before the ground could drink them in. She hurried back inside, arms filled with folded cloth, the sharp, clean scent of sun-dried cotton clinging to her. Later, while the storm battered the house like a living thing, Saya sat near the fire repairing one of her father's shirts. At the table, Corwin Quinn methodically cleaned his rifle, a habit formed after raiders struck the Henderson place 2 valleys away. "Might be best if you stayed with your aunt in Tucson for a while," he said without lifting his eyes. Her needle froze mid-stitch. "I won't leave you here alone, Pa. I'd rest easier knowing you were safe. And I'd rest easier staying right where I belong," she replied, calm but unyielding. "This is my home too." Corwin exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "You're just as hard-headed as your mother." Saya smiled. It was the highest praise he knew how to give. Rain slammed against the windows, the wind moaning through the eaves in a strange harmony with the fire. Then, barely audible beneath the storm, came another sound. A knock. Corwin was on his feet instantly, motionless, a rifle raised. "Behind me," he ordered. Saya set her sewing aside and moved close as he approached the door. "Who's there?" he called, his voice iron hard. No reply, only another weak knock. With practiced caution, Corwin unlatched the door. The wind ripped it open, and lightning split the sky. A body collapsed across the threshold. A young man, copper skin streaked with blood and rain. Black hair plastered to his face. An Apache warrior, barely 20. An arrow pierced his shoulder and a bullet had torn into his side. "Jesus Christ," Corwin muttered, lifting his rifle. "Pa, wait." Saya pushed past him, dropping to her knees beside the fallen man. "He's barely breathing." "He's Apache," Corwin snapped. "He's human," she shot back, already examining the wounds. The young warrior's eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, dark, burning with pain, then closed again. "We can't just let him die. If the neighbors find out we sheltered an Apache, then they won't find out." Saya met her father's gaze, steady and unbroken. "Please, Pa. I couldn't live with myself if we turned him away." Corwin looked at his daughter, then at the wounded Apache, conflict etched deep into his weathered face. At last he lowered the rifle. "Get the medical kit," he said roughly, "and bolt the door." Together they carried the unconscious warrior into the small storage room off the kitchen. Saya worked quickly, slicing away the blood-soaked buckskin shirt. The arrow had passed clean through the shoulder. The bullet had torn a deep, burning groove along his side. "He's lucky," Corwin said, inspecting the damage. "Missed anything vital?" Saya cleaned the wounds with whiskey, her hands steady despite the weight of what they were risking. The Apache stirred. His eyes opened briefly to meet hers, dark as midnight, filled with pain, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. Recognition, maybe? Gratitude. "It's all right," she whispered, though she knew he likely didn't understand. "You're safe now. You're safe now." As Saya worked, she caught sight of markings inked into his chest, tattoos with meanings she couldn't grasp but felt were sacred. Even twisted in pain, his face held a certain quiet dignity. This wasn't just some wandering raider. Something in the way he carried himself, even unconscious, spoke of status of command. "He'll need to stay out of sight," Corwin said, watching as his daughter wrapped the last bandage with practiced hands. "If the patrol comes by and finds him, I'll take care of it." Saya interrupted, her voice steady. "No one's gonna know." Later that night, after Corwin had gone to bed, Saya crept back to check on the stranger. The warrior was awake now, his dark eyes tracking her every move as she knelt beside him with a tin cup of water. "My name's Saya," she said gently, lifting his head so he could drink. "Do you understand me?" He didn't speak, but the flicker in his gaze told her he understood far more than he let on. "I need to call you something," she continued, voice low. "Can you tell me your name?" He swallowed and murmured a single word. "Vec." "Vec," Saya repeated softly, letting the name roll across her tongue. It felt foreign, and yet right. "It's good to meet you, Vec." A flicker of a smile touched his lips before pain dragged him back into darkness. She adjusted his blanket and rose quietly. Outside the storeroom, she leaned against the wall, her heart pounding with the weight of what they'd done. Taking in an Apache warrior wasn't just reckless. It was suicidal. If anyone found out, they'd be marked as traitors. Their land seized. Their lives destroyed. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see were his dark and defiant, yet brimming with pain. She couldn't have done anything else. In a land where mercy was often buried beneath fear and steel, she had chosen to be human. She had no way of knowing how high the price would be or how deeply this decision would reshape her world. For 3 weeks, Saya and her father kept Vec hidden in the storeroom, nursing him slowly back from the edge. He spoke little at first, but his grasp of English became clear in time, and as the days dragged on, Saya found herself drawn to him, at first out of obligation, then from a pull she couldn't explain. "Why were you alone that night?" she asked one afternoon while tending his shoulder. "Where's your family?" His face didn't shift, but his eyes, the kind that held more than words ever could, dimmed with something like grief. "My father is chief," he said at last, halting but clear. "I was scouting. Soldiers came. They hit our camp. Many died." He paused, then added, "I was hunting them when I was shot." Saya's hands stopped. "I'm sorry." "You shouldn't be," Vec replied. "You saved me, even though your people would rather see me dead." "Not all of my people are like that," she said softly. "Same for mine," he answered. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "You are wise, Saya Quinn." As his strength returned, first standing, then walking, Saya watched something unspoken bloom between them. He carried himself with calm resilience, and in quiet moments he shared stories of the Apache way, of their bond with the land of traditions, trampled by white boots and fences. Saya told him about her mother's death, about Corwin's stubborn dream to raise cattle where most men saw only desert. And between them, a bridge formed, silent, steady, linking two worlds that had only ever known war. Then came the day that shattered the quiet. Saya was out back gathering eggs when she heard hooves pounding up the road. She peeked around the coop and froze. 5 mounted soldiers. Leading them was a man she recognized instantly. Drav Harker, the lieutenant known for handling Apache business with brutal resolve. Panic surged. She dropped the basket and sprinted for the house, slipping in the back door. Corwin was already moving toward the storeroom. "Stay here," he told her, voice clipped. Saya nodded, but as soon as he stepped out to meet the soldiers, she raced for Vec. "Vec," she whispered urgently, bursting into the room. "They're here. You have to hide." He was already on his feet, wounds forgotten. Body coiled like a wolf in a corner. They know I'm here. It wasn't a question. How she began then remembered. The Hendersons. They had stopped by just days ago. Had they seen something overheard? I have to go, Vex said, reaching for the blade. Corwin had reluctantly returned. You're still too weak. Saya protested, grabbing his wrist. His hand closed over hers, firm and warm. A current passed through her, fierce and undeniable. Saya Quinn, he said, voice low and solemn. You did what no one else would have dared. I won't forget it. Before she could respond, raised voices echoed from outside. Saya peeked through the window, her breath catching as she spotted Drav Harker outside, barking orders with his usual cold fury. Corwin Quinn stood tall in the yard, arms folded across his chest like a man rooted to the earth. They're here for you, she whispered to Vec. We have to move, now. Her mind raced. Just past the stables, a narrow creek wound its way along the edge of their land, vanishing into the woods. If Vec could make it that far. Come on, she said under her breath, making a split-second choice. Follow me. They slipped out the back, keeping low beneath the wind-swept shadows of dusk. Saya led him toward the barn, her heart hammering. But they hadn't made it halfway when a voice rang out from the front. There by the stables, chaos erupted. Boots thundered, rifles lifted. Corwin's voice boomed like thunder. Leave them be. Vec yanked Saya behind him, his knife flashing in the low light. Run, he growled. You can't die because of me. I'm not leaving you. She shot back, panic choking her. The first shot cracked like lightning. Saya flinched as Vec jerked slightly, hit but still standing. His eyes never left the soldiers charging toward them. Stop! Corwin bellowed, throwing himself between the soldiers and his daughter. That's my girl. Harker's expression turned to stone as he surveyed the scene. Step aside, Quinn. Your daughter's been harboring a sworn enemy of the United States. She's innocent, Corwin barked. If anyone's guilty, it's me. No, Pa, Saya cried, stepping forward. Harker gave a sharp nod. Two soldiers grabbed Corwin, dragging him back as more rushed toward Saya and Vec. Saya Quinn. Harker said, voice like steel. You're under arrest for aiding and abetting an enemy combatant. What followed would haunt Saya's dreams for the rest of her life. Though still weak, Vec lashed out like a cornered wolf. One soldier fired, grazing his arm. In the frenzy, Corwin broke free and ran to protect his daughter, only for more shots to follow. Corwin staggered. Red bloomed across his shirt. Pasea screamed, falling to her knees as he collapsed. His eyes locked onto hers, fading fast. Run, Ellie, he whispered. His fingers slipped from hers. Tears blurred her vision as gunfire echoed around them. Vec was still fighting, cutting through the ranks with raw fury. Blood stained the dirt. Then in a blink he was gone, vanished into the creek bed like smoke on the wind. Hands grabbed her. Harker stood above her, cold and smug. Your father died a traitor, he spat. And you'll hang for treason. But they didn't hang her. The territorial governor, uneasy about executing a woman tied to a respected name, sent her to prison instead. 6 brutal months. When she got out, her world was ash and memory. Whispering Pines Ranch was gone. The cattle sold off. The house reduced to embers. Saya Quinn had nothing left except the stain of betrayal. Word spread. Indian lover. Traitor. No town would hire her. No family would house her. She scraped by, taking in the filthy laundry from the brothels, washing until her hands bled. She lived in a one-room shack far from town, on land no one wanted. Sometimes the only thing that kept her breathing was one memory. I will not forget. Vec's words had branded themselves into her soul. 4 years passed, each one crueler than the last. Her honey-brown hair had dulled, streaked with gray, far too soon. Her soft hands had grown cracked and calloused. Fine dresses were long gone, replaced by threadbare garments, patched so many times they hardly resembled clothes. Yet she endured, and on the loneliest nights she'd step outside her shack, stare at the stars, and wonder, was he still alive? Did he remember her? Did it matter? Arizona Territory, 1869. Saya wiped sweat from her brow and stretched her aching back. The garden behind her cabin showed life's small shoots pushing up from stubborn earth. Each sprout was a tiny rebellion against hardship. Like her, they shouldn't have survived, but did. She was 26 now, worn, weathered, and stronger than ever. The softness of youth had melted away, leaving behind a woman carved by fire and grit. The sun had painted her skin and lined her face, but her eyes, they hadn't changed. Sharp, watchful, unbroken. The cabin she lived in was rough but clean. The land barely fed her, but she made do growing vegetables, keeping hens, hauling laundry for the miners 5 miles west. No, it wasn't the life she dreamed of, but it was hers, built from ruin, hammered out of ashes, and still standing. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the land in firelight, Saya Quinn set down her tools and walked toward the cabin to fix her modest evening meal. She'd just placed a pot of water over the fire when a sound cut through the quiet, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Visitors were rare, welcome ones even rarer. The miners from the West Camp kept their distance, dropping off laundry and collecting it without so much as a word. But others, the ones who came to spit and call her Apache whore, they made her reach for the rifle that always waited by the door, just like her father Corwin Quinn had taught her back when she was barely big enough to lift it. She moved to the window. A lone rider approached, silhouette sharp against the blood-orange sky. He wore a strange mix: buckskin trousers, a white man's shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Something about his posture made her nerves hum. Saya's finger found the trigger. The stranger pulled his horse to a halt about 20 yards out and sat still, letting her take his measure. Then with slow and deliberate care he removed his hat. Her breath caught. That long black hair tied back in leather cord. That sun-dark skin. But it was the eyes, the same dark burning eyes from years ago, that stopped her heart. Vexed, she whispered the name falling from her lips like a prayer. Lowering her rifle, Saya stepped outside, her pulse thudding so loud she was sure he could hear it. The man who stood before her was no longer the bloodied boy she had dragged from death's door. This was a warrior grown, strong, whole, unshakable. He dismounted with quiet grace, but didn't move toward her. He just stood by his horse, giving her space. Saya Quinn. He said, his voice deeper now, rougher with age and wind. His English was smooth, confident. I came back. Simple words, but they rippled through her like distant thunder. Why? Her voice was steady, though her chest ached. I made a promise, Vex said. I told you I wouldn't forget. Her fingers tightened around the rifle still cradled in her hands. It's been 4 years. 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days, he replied, calm as dusk. I counted every one. That broke something in her. You shouldn't have come, she said, though everything inside her screamed the opposite. It's dangerous for you here. I had to know if you were alive, he said, taking a slow step forward. When I got away, I heard the shots. I saw your father fall. His face, always stoic, was cracked by pain. I've carried that weight like a stone in my chest ever since. Saya swallowed hard, her throat suddenly too tight to breathe. It wasn't your fault, she said softly, though she had cursed the sky 100 nights, wondering if it was. What happened after, he asked. Now close enough for her to see the scars time had left, one thin line cutting across his cheek, new lines near his eyes. They locked me up, she said, the words finally spilling out. When they let me go, there was nothing left. The ranch was gone. So were the cattle. Our name, our place, burned away. Vex's expression darkened. They branded you. I'm the woman who chose an Apache over her own kind, she said bitterly. No one wanted anything to do with me after that. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy with all the things neither had said. The sun dipped lower, casting red and gold across the dusty earth, just like the day he'd bled across her doorstep. You should come inside, Saya said, finally stepping aside. Night falls fast around here. He followed her in. The inside of the cabin was plain but neat. A cast-iron stove, a narrow bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a few worn books lined the shelves. Every object worn, every surface cared for just like her. Saya turned back to the stove, tossing another log into the fire and giving the beans a slow stir. Her hands moved automatically, needing the motion, needing something solid to do. You've built a life here, Vex said quietly, standing just inside the doorway. His presence filled the small space. I've survived, she replied, still not meeting his eyes. It's not the same thing. Vex stepped toward the table and let his fingers drift along the worn wooden grain. I came to repay a debt. Saya turned this time, her brow furrowed. There is no debt. You saved my life, he said, and in doing so you lost everything, your father, your home, your name. It wasn't your fault. I carry it anyway. I made my choice, Saya said firmly, and I don't regret it. Their eyes locked across the room, 2 souls with too much history and too many silences. Something passed between them, then quiet but powerful. A current born from shared days of pain, secrets, and the fragile bridge they had once dared to build. Why did you really come back, Vec? She asked, her voice softer now. The mask he wore cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of something rare vulnerability. I told myself it was to repay a debt, he admitted. But that was only part of it. The truth is, I never stopped seeing your face. I never stopped hearing your voice. I came back because I had to know if you remembered me too. Saya's heart stuttered. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I remembered. Vec closed the space between them in 2 long strides, stopping just shy of touching her. His voice dropped to a low, steady hum. I'm no longer the broken boy you carried from death, he said. I've become a leader among my people. I have land, horses, silver, wealth that even your government recognizes by treaty, no less. What are you saying? Saya asked, her breath caught halfway. I'm saying I can return to you. What was taken, Vec replied. Not your father, that loss is beyond any man, but a home, land, cattle, a place to stand tall again, that I can give you. Saya stepped back, at her mind spinning. You can't just buy my life back. Not buy, he said gently. Restore. What was stolen should be returned. And then what, she asked, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. You ride off with a clear conscience? A flash crossed his eyes. Was it hurt or anger? Maybe both. Is that what you think, he said? That I came all this way, risked riding into hostile ground, just to sleep better at night? She turned away, torn between rising hope and old wounds that never fully healed. I don't know what to believe anymore. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm, steady, calloused by years and war. Believe this, he said quietly, In the 4 years since you saved me, I've earned the respect of 2 worlds. I've learned your language, your laws. I sit at tables now, where once they would have gunned me down on sight. How, she asked, her voice barely audible. How did that happen? The world's shifting, Vec explained. The great war between your states is over. New treaties are being signed. My father Oran, he still leads our band, but he's chosen diplomacy over blood. And me, because of what you showed me, I became his voice. Saya studied his face, no longer a youth, but a man carved by wisdom and fire. His words weren't bluster. They came from lived truth. So now you've come to strike a deal with me, she asked, a familiar spark rising in her eyes. The corner of his mouth tugged half amusement, half admiration. No, he said, I've come to offer you a choice, a chance to reclaim what was stolen. And maybe, he paused, something fragile dancing at the edge of his voice, maybe a chance to build something new. Before she could speak, a sound broke the stillness. Hoofbeats. Vec moved to the window in a heartbeat, the warrior in him taking over. He crouched slightly. Gaze narrowed against the falling dusk. Rioters, he said, voice tight. 4 of them. Saya joined him, and the blood drained from her face when she saw the lead rider, Colonel Sylvan Marr. Sylvan. He'd taken command after Drav Harker was killed in an ambush years back. And he was worse, colder, crueler, with a long memory and a personal grudge against Saya Quinn. You have to hide, she said urgently, spinning toward Vec. If he sees you, he'll shoot first, no questions. And what about you? Vec asked, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. What will he do to you? Nothing he hasn't done already, she said grimly. He gets more satisfaction keeping me on the edge. Humiliation's his game. But if he finds you here... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. For a breath, Vec didn't move. Then slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Where Saya crossed the room in 2 quick strides and yanked back a small woven rug. Beneath it, a trap door. The cellar. It's not much, but it's kept my food safe from thieves. It'll do the same for you. Vec descended the ladder into the dark. Just as Saya reached for the trapdoor to seal it, he grabbed her hand. His voice, low and fierce, rose from the shadows. I'll do as you ask, he said. But hear me, Saya Quinn, I didn't come back after 4 damn years just to lose you again. The words, plain and honest, hit Saya like a bolt of lightning. She squeezed Vec's hand once, then let go, closing the trapdoor and sliding the rug back into place just as the first pounding hit her front door. Open up, Quinn. Colonel Sylvan Marr's voice oozed arrogance, the kind of man used to being obeyed, never questioned. Saya took a breath, straightened her skirt, and opened the door with a slow, steady hand. Marr stood there on her step, flanked by 3 soldiers. At 40, he was still striking in a sharp-edged kind of way, his chestnut hair dusted with gray, his uniform crisp despite the desert dust. Colonel Saya said flatly, didn't expect company this late. His eyes swept over her, lingering too long in all the wrong places. Routine patrol, he drawled, though his tone said otherwise. Reports of Apache movement nearby. I haven't seen any, Saya replied. Technically, not a lie. His smirk was cruel and cold. No, that'd be a change. Or do you prefer Apache whore now? That's what the Dustfield men call you, isn't it? Saya didn't blink. So did you ride out here just to insult me, Colonel? Or is there something else you're lacking? His expression darkened. Watch that tongue, woman. You're hanging by a thread out here, and I'm the one holding it. My land, my rules, she said coolly. You're trespassing. Marr let out a humorless chuckle. This dirt worthless. I could seize it with a single signature. Then why haven't you? Saya shot back, even as her heart pounded like war drums beneath her ribs. She could feel Vec's presence under her feet, listening to every word from the shadows below. Marr stepped in closer, making her tilt her chin just to hold his gaze. Maybe I enjoy watching you squirm, he whispered. Maybe I'm waiting for you to crawl. I'd rather die, she said, calm and sure. His eyes sparked with something sharp and dangerous. That can be arranged. Behind him, one of the soldiers shifted uneasily. Colonel. We've still got the Jenkins place before dark. Marr held her stare another moment, then stepped back. Search the cabin. You've got no right, Saya snapped. I've got every right, he snapped back. Conflict with hostile tribes grants me full authority. Or have you forgotten which side you're on? Miss Quinn. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. But inside her stomach twisted like a noose. The soldiers stormed inside, tearing through her tiny home like it was enemy territory. Books tossed, bedding ripped back. Every shelf emptied, every sack opened, every tin rattled. She stood motionless, every nerve praying they wouldn't notice the floor. After a few tense minutes, one of them stepped out. "Nothing, sir. It's clean." Mar looked disappointed. "Mount up," he barked. But before turning, he leaned in again, close enough she could smell the sweat under his polished buttons. "This ain't over, Quinn. One day your Apache friends'll ride back for you. And when they do, you'll hang beside 'em." Saya said nothing, just stood tall in the fading light, jaw-tight spine straighter than a rifle barrel. Only when the last rider disappeared into the dust did she close the door. Her hands trembled as she lifted the rug and pulled open the trapdoor. Vec rose from the dark like a shadow taking shape. His face burned with fury, held barely in check. "That man," he said, voice low and deadly, "has threatened you before." She nodded. "More than once. And each time, you face him alone." There was admiration in his tone, but more than that, rage. "This ain't living Saya Quinn. It's all I've got," she answered simply. Vec stepped closer. His presence always held weight, but now it felt like protection. "No," he said without hesitation. "It isn't." And for the first time looking into his eyes, she started to believe he might be right. The weeks that followed changed everything. Vec didn't stay at her cabin. It was far too risky. Instead, he built a small camp high in the hills, tucked in the folds of the land, like it had always been there. Only those who knew the land well could even hope to find it. But each morning, with the sun barely cresting the horizon, he'd appear at her gate. Silent, steady. By dusk, he'd vanish into the hills again. Day after day, they worked side by side. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to give her life back. But not with promises or pity, with action. Through a web of quiet connections, Apache and white alike, Vec started reclaiming pieces of land. Not just any land, her land. Parcels once part of Whispering Pines, now scattered through legal trickery and greed. One evening, as they sat on her porch, the red light of sunset spilling across the dry grass, Saya flipped through a stack of property deeds. "How did you do this?" she asked, barely able to believe what she held. Legal deeds, real ones with her name spelled clear as day across them. "I told you," Vec said, his voice carrying quiet pride. "I studied your laws. I learned how your people trade, and I found men who care more for gold than for grudges. And I found others, men like your father, who still believe in justice." One of those men was Jareth Vale, a territorial judge who had long questioned the way Whispering Pines had been seized. When Vec finally placed the right evidence in front of him, evidence he'd spent years digging up, Vale had acted. And fast. The land was returned. But the land was just the beginning. Within a month, a small herd grazed on her pasture once again. A solid new barn stood where only thorns and dirt had been. Fences rose, water lines ran deep, and the Grupo de Vaqueros Vec had hired from the south worked hard under the scorching sun, building it all from nothing. Saya threw herself into the work, hands blistered back sore, but something in her lit up. The sun browned her skin, the gray faded from her hair. And for the first time in years, she hoped. And Vec was always there, shoulder to shoulder, teaching her the Apache way of reading signs in the land. She taught him ranching livestock soil. They shared sweat and silence, growth and grit. At night they'd sit by the porch while the stars blazed overhead, talking in a way only survivors can, of pasts, of dreams, of the invisible line they had both stepped across. One day Vec told her, as a cool wind stirred the mesquite, "My father chose peace with the army." He paused. "Not all Apache did. Some still raid, still fight." "And you," Saya asked, her voice quiet. "Where do you stand in all that?" Vec took a long time before answering. "I stand where I can help my people most," he said finally. "Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes it means shaking hands with those I don't trust." but it always means surviving. Saya looked around at the land they'd pulled back from ruin. Is that why you did all this? To help your people survive? Vec turned his gaze on her, starlight flickering in his eyes. No, he said, plainly. I did this for you, because when I was nothing but a wounded enemy, you saw me as a man. His voice dropped low. You gave me my life, Saya Quinn. Everything else came after. Something shifted that night, quiet and unspoken, like a door creaked open where one had always been shut. When he rode off to his camp that evening, she stood in the doorway longer than usual, feeling the empty space he left behind. The next morning, dark clouds rolled, in a rare promise of rain over the dust-bitten land. Saya was repairing fence posts near the east boundary when she spotted them, 3 riders not from town, but from the direction of the Apache reservation. Up on the barn roof, Vec stilled. He climbed down the boots, hitting dirt without a sound, and came to stand beside her. His shoulders tensed. The riders approached at a steady pace, no weapons drawn. Their faces bore paint, not for war, but for counsel. Diplomacy. The lead figure, an older man, with lines etched deep by sun and time, wore a mix of buckskin and trader's garb. A silver peace medal rested against his chest, U.S. government issue given to tribal leaders who signed treaties. My father Vec murmured, his voice soft with both reverence and caution. Oran dismounted slowly, moving with the calm dignity of a man who had seen more winters than most warriors ever lived. His dark gaze swept across the property, the barn, the herd, and finally, his son standing beside a white woman. Vec greeted him first in Apache, then turned to Saya and switched to English. This is Saya Quinn, he said. She's the one who saved my life. Oran studied her closely, not with judgment, but deep appraisal. I have heard much, he said, his English slow but firm. My son tells me you have the courage of 10 warriors and the mind of an elder. Saya bowed her head slightly. Your son's being generous. I haven't earned such praise. A flicker of approval touched the chief's eyes. He also says you lost everything, because you chose to save him. I did lose a lot, Saya replied evenly, but not everything. The chief glanced toward Vec, something passing silently between father and son. My son hasn't returned to our camp for many nights now, he said. Today, I see why. Vec stepped forward. Father, Oran raised a hand. I didn't come to take you back. I came to see the woman who holds your heart, and to see what you've built with her. Saya's cheeks flushed hot at the bluntness of it. Beside her, Vec didn't say a word. He neither confirmed nor denied. He didn't need to. You're welcome here, Chief Oran, Saya said, finally finding her voice. Would you and your men take food and water with us? The older man's eyes creased with the barest hint of a smile. We will. That afternoon felt like something out of another life. Her small kitchen table had been expanded with wooden planks to host their guests. She watched as Vec and his father spoke respect between them, yes, but also tension, the kind that grows between a leader set in the old ways and a son who had carved his own. The 2 other warriors, Tali and Ruko, remained mostly silent, eyes sharp, observing everything. But Saya knew what they were, seeing a woman who had survived fire, a warrior who had crossed lines, and the land they were reclaiming together. Saya served up a simple meal, stew thick with beans and cornbread baked that morning. The room was filled with quiet tension, the kind born of truths left unspoken. As the last bites were taken, Oran finally spoke in Apache. Saya didn't understand the words, but she didn't need to. She felt the weight of them in the air. Vec answered in the same tongue, calm but firm, his voice steady with something deeper than just explanation. He glanced at Saya more than once. She knew she was what they were speaking about. Eventually, Oran switched to English. You understand what this means? He asked his son. The path you've chosen. I do, Vec answered without hesitation. Then the chief turned to Saya. And you, Saya Quinn, Do you understand what it means to stand between two worlds, to belong to neither, and be accepted by none? She met his gaze head on. With respect, Chief Oran, I've lived in that space for 4 years now. I'm already a woman, without a people. A flicker of something unreadable passed through the old chief's eyes. Perhaps surprise, perhaps understanding, or perhaps he said slowly, "You're a woman at the start of a new people." With that he stood fluid and proud, the same calm power his son carried. My son has made his choice. I won't stand in his way. The visitors rode out just as the first drops of rain began to fall, vanishing into the gray horizon. Saya and Vec stood together on the porch, watching them fade into the mist and wind. "What did he mean?" she asked softly. "That you'd chosen a path." Vec turned to her. Rain clung to his hair, sliding down his cheekbones. His eyes burned with something he usually kept buried. He meant, "I chose you, Saya. Not for a favor, not out of guilt, but because in all the years since that night, no other woman, Apache or white, has ever touched my heart like you have." Her breath caught in her throat. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he added gently. "Just think on what could be. Not between a wounded boy and his savior, but between a man and a woman who've both lost one world and might build another." The rain poured harder now, turning the yard into rivers of mud. Still neither of them moved. "Folks won't accept us," Saya whispered. "Not your people, not mine." "Some already do," Vec countered. "My father, Jareth Vale, the Vaqueros who stayed and didn't blink. The world is shifting, Saya. Not fast enough, not wide enough, but it is." He reached for her hands, finally closing that last inch between them. His touch was warm and sure, different from any moment they'd ever shared. "I won't promise an easy road," he said, voice low. "But I promise I'll walk it beside you." In that moment, soaked to the bone, the storm above and fire in his words, Saya made her choice. The same one she'd made years ago when he lay bleeding across her threshold. She chose to see through fear, through race, through rules. She chose him. Saya leaned forward and kissed him. It began gentle, uncertain testing, but then his arms wrapped around her and the kiss deepened into something fierce and unshakable. When they finally parted, breathless and wet with rain, Vec pressed his forehead against hers. "You never stop surprising me, Saya Quinn," she smiled. A full, unguarded smile. "Good," she said. "I'd hate to become predictable." The days that followed bloomed like spring after a long winter. Vec stopped returning to his camp. He stayed with her. They worked shoulder to shoulder, not just rebuilding land, but forging a life together. Word traveled as it always did. Some of the Vaqueros left uncomfortable with what they saw. Others stayed unfazed or quietly loyal. The women in town stopped bringing laundry, cutting off a meager source of coin. But Judge Jareth Vale, ever a man of principle, brought work from the courthouse and sent others her way. Through it all they grew closer. They taught each other, step by step. He showed her how to track elk in dry terrain. She baked the bread her mother once made with calloused hands and gentle care. They laughed. They rested. They shared traditions like language no words needed. At night, under the canopy of stars, they made plans. Real plans. For the first time, the future wasn't a shadow. It had shape. But the past, it never fades easy. The day it came back arrived clear and sharp like a rifle shot. It was autumn. Saya was in the garden, pulling the last of the summer beans. The sky was wide and empty. But then she heard that low-rising thunder of hooves. She looked up. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, too many for a friendly drop-by. From the barn, Vec emerged, rifle already in hand. His eyes darkened, face set. "Get inside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For once, Saya didn't argue. She bolted for the cabin, grabbing her rifle from its place by the door, and posting herself at the front window. Her pulse thundered. Dust rose on the horizon, and when the riders came into view, her stomach dropped. Sylvan Marr was leading them. At least a dozen soldiers in crisp Union blue followed him, a wall of steel and discipline cutting through the desert haze. But behind them came others. Civilians, townsmen, faces she recognized, some of them old friends of her father before his death. Now just shadows with guns. Vex stood alone in the yard, rifle in hand, not raised, not pointed, just ready. They stopped maybe 30 yards from the porch, Apache, Marr-called voice slicing through the silence. "Step off the Blake woman's land." Vex stood tall, calm. "This is my home," he said. "You're the one trespassing." A ripple passed through the soldiers. The townsman shifted uncomfortably. Marr's face twisted. "This land belongs to white settlers, not Apache savages. Whatever little arrangement you've got with the Blake whore ends now." Saya saw red. Before she could even think, she stormed out the front door, rifle slung in her arms, planting herself beside Vex. "This is my land," she snapped, voice ringing strong. "Deeded legal by Judge Jareth Vale. And Vex here because I asked him to be." Marr sneered. "Oh, I'm sure he is. Invitation to your bed, no doubt." That drew a few mean chuckles from behind him. "You've finally confirmed what everyone in Tucson whispers behind your back. An Indian lover in every way." She felt Vex tense, but she didn't flinch. "What I do on my land is none of your concern, Colonel. Now speak your business or ride the hell out." Marr's jaw tightened. "My business is the law, Miss Quinn, and that law says no Apache sets foot off reservation without a military escort." He pointed to Vex. "This one comes with us." "Now." "He's here by permission," Saya said sharply. "From Oran, his father, the same chief who signed your treaty. Permission to trade, maybe." Marr allowed his smile razor thin. "But not to shack up with a white woman. That's against military order and common decency." One of the townsmen urged his horse forward. "Oran Pike." Gray and grim, he'd once drank whiskey with Corwin Quinn under the cottonwoods. "Saya," he said almost kindly, "your pa was a good man. He wouldn't want this. Living like this. Come back to town with us. We'll find you honest work, a proper home, a proper place," she echoed bitterly. "Like when I returned from prison and found my house burned, and my father's so-called friends nowhere to be found." Her voice cracked. "Where were you then, Mr. Pike?" The man dropped his gaze. It was different back then. Tensions were high, and they're not. Now she gestured around. "This looks a whole lot like a lynch mob to me." Marr cut in. "Enough of this." His hand fell to his belt. "Apache, you're coming with us. Peacefully or not." Vex didn't raise his weapon, but when he spoke his voice carried weight like a thunderhead rolling in. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "This is my home now, with this woman." He paused, eyes locked on Marr. "If that breaks your law, then your law is broken." Silence. It held tight, electric. One twitch of a trigger finger, and the world would burn. Then Salvation rode in. "Hold your ground, Colonel Marr." Every head turned. Judge Jareth Vale, stern as ever, approached on horseback, flanked by 2 Apache warriors. One of them was Tali, the same scout who had ridden with Oran weeks back. The judge brought his mount up beside Marr's. His face, carved by sun and justice, was all stone and authority. "Care to explain this?" "Formation." "Colonel, I'm enforcing military regulation," Marr snapped. "Reservation boundaries. That Apache has no right to be here." The judge reached into his coat. "Actually, he does." He pulled out a stamped, sealed document. "By order of the territorial governor and in gratitude for services rendered to the United States, Vex, son of Chief Oran, is granted full right to reside and work on lands adjacent to the reservation." He turned slightly, his voice rising so the crowd could hear. That includes this property now lawfully owned by Miss Saya Quinn. Murmurs spread through the crowd like prairie fire. Mar snatched the paper from Vale's hand, scanning it. His lips curled in disbelief. This is irregular. Unprecedented. So is everything out here, Vale replied coolly. That's what makes it the frontier, Jareth Vale answered dryly. The governor believes peace out here takes more than muskets and paper treaties. It takes flexibility. Flexibility. Sylvan Mar spat like the word itself was poison. You mean letting a savage bed down with a white woman? That's not diplomacy, that's disgrace. Saya stepped forward, then her rifle still in hand, but her voice calm and cold as steel. No colonel. The disgrace here is your hate. She didn't blink, didn't back down. Vec has done more for peace between our people than all your bullets combined. He's negotiated treaties that save lives on both sides. He's rebuilt what your kind burned. Mar's face flushed dark with rage. And what would your father say? Knowing his daughter took an Apache into her bed. Saya didn't hesitate. My father, she said firmly, taught me to judge a man by his actions, not by the blood in his veins. When everyone else turned their back, Vec saved me. Her voice softened, but her words struck deeper. He gave back what was stolen. He's carried himself with more honor than any man I've ever known. She turned toward Vec, drawing strength from the way he stood beside her, unshaken. If my father were here today, I believe he'd be proud of the man I've chosen. Vale cleared his throat and took a step forward. The document is lawful and binding, Colonel. Unless you plan to defy a direct order from the territorial governor, I suggest you back down. For a moment it looked like Mar might draw. His hand hovered near the grip of his sidearm. His eyes, burning with hate, shifted from Saya to Vec and back again. His whole body tensed. Then, jaw tight, he reined it in. "This ain't over," he growled. "Laws can change. Orders can be undone." Perhaps Vale replied, folding the document back into his coat. "But until they do, you'll follow them, and you'll leave these two in peace." Mar gave a sharp nod to his men. "Mount up," he snapped. The soldiers obeyed. The column began to turn, boots clicking and rifles clinking. But Orrin Pike, the aging rancher, lingered. He leaned in toward Saya. His voice dropped. "Be careful," he murmured. "Mar won't let this go, and others think like him." "I know," she said quietly. "But I won't live in fear anymore, Mr. Pike. Not of him. Not of anyone." Pike looked at her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Vec. "Your father was my friend," he said, voice worn but sincere. "For his sake, I'll do what I can to keep Mar on a leash." "Thank you," Saya said, and she meant it. As the last horse kicked up dust down the trail, Judge Vale stepped down from his saddle and walked toward them, shoulders heavy but face soft with relief. "That got a little closer than I care for," he admitted. He looked at the couple standing together in the dirt beneath the storm-washed sky. "Mar wasn't wrong about one thing," the judge continued. This union of yours, it's unprecedented." Vec gestured toward the official document now tucked safely away. "How'd you pull this off?" Vale smiled. "Let's just say the governor owes me a few favors, and Oran's diplomacy didn't hurt. That old chief may speak with few words, but they land like thunder." He nodded toward Tali and Ruko, the two warriors still mounted at a distance. "These two helped me see the personal stakes here, and I listened." Saya felt her cheeks flush, but then Vec's hand slid into hers. His grip was steady, warm. "What now?" she asked. Now the judge straightened. "Now you build a life, a ranch, a future. Show folks it's possible that two worlds can live side by side." He grew serious. "It won't be easy. Mar's got friends in high places. Some wear uniforms. Some wear suits. But you've got allies too, more than you think." As he turned to leave, Vale paused and looked at Saya once more. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. not just for your grit, but for your vision. Corwin Quinn was a man who always saw what could be, not just what was. Tears brimmed in Saya's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Vale mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "I'll be back from time to time. The governor will want to know how his little experiment is holding up." Then he rode out, taking the Apache warriors with him, leaving behind a silence that felt whole. For the first time, Saya and Vec stood alone in the yard. Their yard, truly theirs. "Are you afraid?" he asked, watching her closely. She let the question settle, then gave a quiet, honest reply. "Not of Mar, not anymore." She squeezed his hand. "But of what's ahead, of choosing a road no one's walked before." She nodded. "Yeah, a little." Vec smiled softly. His eyes held something ancient and tender. "My father always said fear is wisdom. It sharpens the mind, keeps the blade steady." Then she looked at him. "And what does your heart say?" That made him laugh, low and warm, and when he smiled, really smiled, it was like dawn breaking after a long winter night. "My heart says some journeys are worth the danger," Vec whispered, pulling her into his arms. "And the one I've started with you, it's just begun." As the Arizona sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the land in streaks of crimson and gold, just like the night she first saved him, Saya Quinn stood in the circle of Vec's embrace, gazing out across the land they had fought to reclaim. The road ahead was unknown, but full of promise. They had built something from ashes of fire, of war, of sorrow, and in that moment, with the man she loved beside her, and the home they'd raised with their own hands behind them, Saya knew her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. What she'd lost had been returned, not just land, not just livelihood, but purpose, belonging, and a love that had defied every line drawn by hate. In saving Vec, she had saved herself. He hadn't just brought her peace, he had brought her back to life. As night fell, they turned together toward the warm glow of their home. Hand in hand they faced the unknown. Ready. Arizona Territory, 1875. The ranch house stood tall beneath the morning sun, its whitewashed walls glowing against the backdrop of sharp, rugged mountains. This was no longer the weather-beaten cabin where Saya had once survived alone. Whispering Pines Ranch had risen again, bigger, stronger, a testament to perseverance and love. Children's laughter echoed through the garden. 6-year-old Cale, with his mother's golden brown hair and his father's deep Apache eyes, raced a yapping puppy through rows of squash and beans. In his small hands, 2 bloodlines ran side by side. He was the living bridge between worlds. Saya watched from the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly, where another life grew strong. At 32, the scars of her past had faded. In their place bloomed joy. But it hadn't come easy. Sylvan Mar had spent years making good on his promise, petitioning against their union, spreading rumors, challenging them at every turn. But Jareth Vale had been right. They weren't alone. Oren, once skeptical, had become a quiet champion, working back channels through tribal leadership to protect the path his son had chosen. Oren Pike, true to his word, rallied ranchers to stand by Saya, and when Cale was born, even hardened hearts softened at the sight of a child born from both bloodlines, carrying the strength of both peoples. From the barn, Vec appeared, speaking in soft Spanish, with one of the vaqueros. He walked like a man who belonged to both saddle and soil, half rancher, half diplomat. At 30, he was respected on both sides of the river. He traveled often between Tucson and the reservation, helping to settle disputes and mend fractures. Silver-threaded, his black hair now just enough to lend him a certain gravity. Spotting Saya on the porch, he finished the conversation and crossed the yard, boots crunching in the dust. He laid a gentle hand on her stomach. "How are you feeling?" he asked, concern in his voice. She smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Strong. But your daughter's in a kicking mood." "My daughter?" He lifted a brow. "Yesterday you were swearing it was a boy." "A mother knows," she said, feigning solemnity before breaking into laughter. Either way, he said, watching Kael in the dirt, this child will be loved. Saya followed his gaze. Kael was teaching the puppy something serious. Brow furrowed in concentration. As he is, she said softly. Vek's expression turned thoughtful. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The life you might have had if you'd stayed with your people. He turned to her, eyes steady. I am with my people, he said. You, Kael. The hands who believe in this land, this ranch, this life. He touched her cheek thumb, tracing the place where smile lines had started to form. And I've never not once regretted the path that brought me back to you. From the distance, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. A rider approached Judge Jareth Vale, making his usual rounds. Though no longer a judge, Mar had finally succeeded in having him removed 2 years ago. Vale had become more family than visitor. To Kael, he was Uncle Tom. We should ask him to stay for supper, Saya said. He always brings news from Tucson. Vek nodded, eyes tracking the rider. The world keeps shifting, he said. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. He looked out across the land, the barn, the garden, the children's voices. But here, we've built something that'll last. Saya leaned into his chest, resting her head beneath his chin. In that moment, she felt the same safety she'd felt 6 years ago when he'd first touched her hand by firelight and said nothing, but everything. Yes, she whispered as Kael ran to greet the arriving horseman. Something that'll last. And as the Arizona sun cast long golden rays over the ranch, Saya Quinn knew without a shred of doubt that the night she saved Vek, losing everything she thought mattered, was never the end. It was the beginning, the start of a story neither of them could have written. Alone, a story of exile and return, of survival and renewal. A story about daring to cross boundaries others called forbidden. About love taking root in soil scorched by hate and fear and blooming anyway. Because in choosing to save him, she had unknowingly opened the door to something greater than survival. She had chosen transformation, and their story became a legacy whispered in the winds of the valley, carried in the laugh of a child, etched in the hands of a couple rebuilding something with more than timber and nails. The story of Saya and Vek reminds us that change often begins not in battlefields or courtrooms, but in choices. In the quiet bravery of seeing another's humanity when the world demands otherwise. In holding out your hand when it's easier to look away. In loving someone even when the world tells you not to. Their story dares us to ask, what if love wasn't bound by fear? What if compassion was stronger than rules? What if 2 people from 2 broken worlds could create a new one? Thank you for staying with us through this unforgettable journey. If Saya and Vek's story moved your heart like it did ours, help us keep telling these powerful tales. Like this story, if you felt the emotion, comment with your thoughts. We read every word. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next tale. Share this with someone who needs a story of hope today. From all of us, thank you. Every kind word keeps our fire burning. And when this video ends, another story from our channel will appear. Click it and let yourself be surprised. We'll be waiting to welcome you back. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.